Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 LTCAP Guidelines Update. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our workshops can take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders throughout California. Live closed captioning is available on this webinar. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document that the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc, and we will have them returned to you as soon as possible. For all of our workshops, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments throughout this workshop. We will stop periodically throughout to address any stakeholder questions. Utilizing the Zoom feature, you will see the webinar control panel likely located at the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raised hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raised hand feature as soon as we reach an item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it is your turn to make your comment. Once you have been unmuted, please make sure to state your name and your agency that you are representing. Additionally, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your comment or question, and commission staff will read those on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise, and please make sure that your comments add new information. If you face any sort of technical issues throughout this workshop, please feel free to contact me through the Q&A or the chat feature, and I will do my best to assist you. And with that, I will turn things over back to you, Rebecca.
So before we go to Rebecca, I just want to let everyone know, Rebecca, I'm sorry if you didn't want me to say this, but both Alika and Rebecca are very sick. So they're going to do the best they can, but Rebecca is not going to come on camera, not because she doesn't want you to see her, but
actually, I don't want you to see me. Actually.
Okay. So we're both of them are being real troopers in doing this workshop, but both of their voices are kind of iffy. So if Rebecca's starts not feeling that good, I'll take over and do the best I can. And hopefully Rebecca will trust me. So anyway, I just wanted to let everyone know that. And so just please be kind to them. Thanks.
Yes, please be mean to me next week. I would love some grace today. But thank you, Lori. I do appreciate you saying that. And I won't be on camera, so that is fine. It gives you more space on your screen for the slides. Alika, go ahead and advance the next couple, which is the first two, I think, and we'll go to the agenda. And this is a recap of what Alika spoke about, materials posted on the website. Next slide, please. Instructions that she already read. Next slide, please. And today's agenda. So we'll be going over the program overview. A lot of you who are, have been with us since the first kickoff meeting and have been with the program since its inception are going to probably be bored. But this is for new folks who maybe aren't aware or as familiar with the program. So we'll go through the authority and the purpose of the program, the eligibility requirements. And there's a new planning document out that we want to take an opportunity and let everyone know. So we'll talk about the script, which will be released by Caltrans or has been released by Caltrans. I also have a Caltrans partner here, Lucas Sanchez from the headquarters Division of Transportation Planning, who put the script together. So if there are any technical questions, he will be able to answer those, but we'll go through the script and give everyone a high level overview. Then we will reflect on cycle one, what went well, what was challenging. And then how the program in cycle 2 will change. We are losing the state appropriation that carried us through cycle 1, so we'll only have federal dollars. We'll talk about how that'll impact the program. I also have quite a large variety of policy topics to bring to everyone today for discussion, and then we'll have an open stakeholder Q&A or discussion in case we didn't cover something somebody's interested in discussing. And then the last thing here, we'll just wrap up. So next slide, please, Alika. Or actually, you know what, before that happens, does anyone have any questions before we move on? Probably not. Okay.
Nope, I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised.
Perfect. Thanks, Alika. So let's go to the next slide. And so we have the program overview. So if you click one more time, we'll go to the authority and the purpose of the program. So the LTCAP was created by the federal EJA that passed in 2021. EJA created a program called PROTECT, which is the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost something. Oh my goodness, I can't remember. Sorry, I got distracted by Spiro. I wanted to quickly confirm happened in 2025. There's nothing happening in 2024. Guidelines will take about a year. So the guidelines will be releasing in June with a call for projects at that time. Nominations will occur from that period in June to the end of August. Then we'll have evaluations, staff recommendations with a program adoption March 2025. So sorry, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, Spiro, but I wanted to answer you. So PROTECT was a formula and discretionary program that came to the states as a formula, and SB 198 from the state of California created quite a few programs, one of which was the LTCAP, which I think it was 40% of the formula funds that came to California was split into the LTCAP to support the local development and implementation of climate adaptation projects. And so that is where we are today. We have our formula federal dollars and SB 198 legislation, which added a few more layers of requirements onto the program and for any projects funded through the program. Next slide, please.
Hey, Rebecca, we've gotten a couple questions in and we have a hand raised.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. So we got one question in from Norbert Dahl stating, good morning, when was SB 198 adopted or chaptered into law?
June 2022, I believe, Norbert.
Okay, and he also has his hand raised. Norbert, go ahead. And please remember to introduce yourself and the agency you're representing.
Hi, Norbert, you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
Oh, okay. So I'm going to mute him. It looks like he didn't mean to raise his hand, so I'll go ahead and lower your hand.
Okay. Are there any other questions before we move on?
Nope, that's it.
Oh, okay. All right, next slide, please. So the eligibility requirements for the program, we have who can apply: MPOs, RTPAs, cities, counties, federally recognized tribes, joint powers authorities. This program is for the local road system. It can also be applied for on system, so capital projects as well, but that are driven sort of by the MPO or TPA. The facilities that this funding can be used for, it could be used for existing roads, streets, and parkways, existing bridges, existing railroad crossings, drainage structures, and public transportation facilities. So Any project that affects these facilities, that could be for climate adaptation, such as raising a bridge, increasing the size of a culvert, are all eligible. And then activities, there are 4 sort of main buckets of activities that Protect identified. So those are resilience improvements, again, to an existing facility, community resilience and emergency evacuation routes. So this can be for enhancing the ability of an emergency evacuation route, such as implementing ITS measures to quickly move people out of the way, or I should say evacuate the affected area, also to make sure that emergency services can make their way into an affected area. At-risk coastal infrastructure. So this would be anything affected by king tide, storm surge, sea level rise, cliff retreat, etc. And then any project that is receiving Protect funding may also include natural infrastructure elements. So typically, most of the guidance coming out from FHWA tends to be around like coastal natural resources. So implementing some sort of like bluff feature or natural plantings to help absorb some of the water. But yeah, these are the 4 buckets. So this is completely unchanged from cycle 1 for anyone who is familiar with the program. None of this has been changed or affected in any way. Next slide. Or actually, any questions on this before we move on?
I don't see any hands raised or questions at this time.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is the script that I had mentioned earlier. This is the script stands for the State Climate Resilience Improvement Plan for Transportation. So the purpose of the script was it's an optional component out of the Protect legislation. It incentivizes state departments of transportation to create a state resilience improvement plan. Luckily, California was already really ahead of the curve for the resilience plan. And so while it took a lot of work, Caltrans was pretty well poised to put this plan together fairly quickly. It addressed a summary of California's climate policies mandated by, a breadth of legislation, executive orders, policies, and the best science and data that California utilizes in climate planning. It also illustrates an existing it illustrates the existing and planned adaptation efforts in the state. And the bolded part is what is interesting for you all. So it establishes an unconstrained project priority list to identify projects selected for or that are applying to Protect formula or discretionary funding. So what that means is if you have already received or if you are planning to apply to receive LTCAP or the federal discretionary program, which is sort of like the LTCAP, but at the federal level. If you submit the project to Caltrans and it is put on the unconstrained PPL, you will receive, if the project is selected for funding, a 10% reduction of your federal cost share. So this is a big deal. In the first cycle of LTCAP, we had 148 million in state highway account funding that the legislature gave as like a one-time sort of appropriation. That one-time funding was really, really instrumental last cycle in helping a lot of, well, not a lot, but a few applicants cover their match. For a lot of our rural agencies, smaller agencies, the match, 20% match is a high bar. And so we really loved having the state appropriation last cycle to be able to grant that flexibility. We won't have that this cycle, but 10% is much better than 20%. And so if you are thinking of applying to the LTCAP or the federal discretionary program, it's very important. Well, maybe not. If your agency is very wealthy, I don't know, maybe it's not important, but to those that are counting their dollars, getting their project on the script project priority list will be a huge help in reducing the match requirement for Protect. So are there any questions here before we move on?
We have one hand raised. Lucas, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. This is Lucas Sanchez. Hi, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lucas. Yes.
Hey, folks. I just wanted to introduce myself. For all intents and purposes, I'm the Protect Program Manager on the Caltrans side, although it takes a village. I work with local assistants as well and a few others in different divisions. I manage the website that houses the recently federally approved Resilience Improvement Plan. I'll drop that link in the chat. It has a lot of helpful resources, and you all are getting a preview of an intake form to request for us to review and add your Protect nominations, whether that's for the LTCAP or the federal discretionary grants, which we're expecting the second NOFO to drop as early as this spring for cycle 2 for those as well. I'm going to drop that link in the chat. Like I said, we are rolling out, like a constant contact announcement with all the information about this as well. Hopefully next week. We were really trying this week. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it aligned with a couple other workshops. If some of you were in the FSIP workshop yesterday as well, we presented on Protect and announced this there as well. But anyways, one other thing to keep an eye out for is on February 21st, I'll be holding a sort of 2-hour informal drop-in session. No pre-registration is required. That link will be added to the same website that I'll put in the chat now for you all to join. Once you have a chance to look at that intake form, if you have any questions about the questions that are in that intake form or the process, etc., that's what that time will be dedicated for on the 21st. It'll be in the afternoon. So yeah, looking forward to all of that. And just one other thing to note is that this is a federal plan. If you look at the plan itself, it's very specific and heavy on what Caltrans is doing at the state DOT. But luckily, the way the Protect statutes were written is that for the project list component, we can be as inclusive as we want to be, and offering inclusion of external, partner projects on that list as well. So that's our goal, is to be as inclusive as possible. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Lucas, before you go, we did get a question about how do projects get on the unconstrained list of the script. Can you answer that now, or would you recommend they attend your workshop coming up?
I can do both. So in a nutshell, If you check out that link, again, you guys are getting a preview. Detailed, constant contact info is going out about this again next week, ideally. But if you check out that link, there's an accordion drop down towards the middle bottom of that page. It says new script project priority list intake form with a bit more information on that process there. It's everyone's favorite thing. It's a smart sheet intake form. So you're basically just going to submit some identifying information about what you are nominating for either of these Protect grants this year. And I understand that some folks are, potentially nominating one project for both the LTCAP funds and the federal discretionary. That's fine. It doesn't make a difference to FHWA for inclusion on the list on which one you're identifying it for. So you would get that benefit, assuming FHWA offers the same for their grants in their second cycle as well. So basically, yeah, it's submitting a form, and we will review those as they come in. We'll be setting deadlines as soon as we basically get word about that cycle 2 NOFO on the federal end as well, which is just not out yet. We haven't even heard, of what's been awarded for cycle 1, as I'm sure a lot of you are paying attention to. I see a few more questions coming in. When is the webinar for script? Is there a registration link? There's not a link yet. The webinar is going to be on the 21st, and there's no registration required. It will be on that website that you all are probably looking at now. So that'll be added shortly. Another question says, the website says the script is updated periodically. How often will you update the project list? Right. So at least annually, we would love to submit. So all of this has to be approved by FHWA, whatever the batch of projects for 2024 that we want to add to the list, that needs to be submitted and reviewed and approved by FHWA. And they requested 30 days. All that has to be done, at least on the federal end for those grants, before applications are submitted to FHWA for that national program. The challenge is we don't know when that national program is rolling out this year. Last year, it opened in April and applications were due in mid-August. It could be earlier this year. So that the deadlines, as I mentioned a moment ago, totally depend on when that second NOFO comes out. And I'll give the group a warning that it might be more aggressive this year, and everything might be earlier this year. So I think maybe the biggest take home is, as most of you probably already are, just really considering what your highest priority near-term nominations may be for one or both of these programs. So to try to answer that more succinctly, at least once, we may be able to update twice a year, depending on the timeline between the LTCAP program and the national program, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Lucas. I'm not seeing any other questions come in or hands raised.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks all. One last thing I'll mention too is we have an FAQ. There's a placeholder for the link on the top right of that website. That should be up there by this afternoon. Again, we were trying our best to get everything aligned for this week and missed that by a little bit. So apologies. But that website is your friend and your home to get all things latest updates for the script piece of this Protect program. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Lucas,
thanks, Lucas.
are you going to be on the whole workshop today?
Yeah, I'll stick around.
Okay.
Yeah, and planning on attending the next few as well. So
Okay.
I can give rolling updates to this group as things kind of progress. As I mentioned, we're waiting for updates from a handful of folks, including the feds on the cycle 2. So happy to continue joining these and sharing information as it comes in.
Okay, so Lucas will be here if you think of any other questions on script.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lucas. I really appreciate you jumping in to answer those questions and give more background. We will move on since there aren't any more questions for the script. We can move along to the next slide. And we'll reflect a little bit on cycle 1. Next slide, Alika. So a quick summary of cycle 1, we had 296.5 million, almost split equally between our Protect funding and the state appropriation granted from SB 198. We received a total of 22 applications and we were able to program 15. We were actually able to program all of the eligible applications that we received, which was great news. We did overprogram a little bit in order to accommodate all of the projects, and so the next cycle will have a tiny bit less. Next slide, please, Lika. So we had some challenges in the first cycle. Protect had requires at least 40% of the dollars flow to disadvantaged communities, but SB 198 requires 100%. And so we had some difficulty trying to figure out how we were going to make that work. We ended up having all applicants indicate using federal disadvantaged community tools and state tools to indicate whether their project would benefit a federally not federally recognized, but a federal disadvantaged community or a state disadvantaged community. It ended up being okay. All of the applicants were able to do that, and it seemed to actually work very well. So we'll be keeping that again this cycle, even though we're losing the state appropriation. We'll get into that a little later. We did have limits by phase. So Protect only allows 10% of Protect funding to go to any phase that's not construction. So basically 90% of Protect dollars need to go towards construction activities, but SB 198 didn't have any stipulation about phases. So we had a rough time trying to figure out how to handle that, but we did okay. We prioritized more pre-plant, like pre-construction phases, so PAD, PSNE right away. we made that decision in the hopes that for folks that were given money for those phases, the second cycle, they could come back and apply for construction. Although we did fund quite a bit of construction phase in our cycle 1. We also, for applicants that wanted to conduct work under that community resilience emergency evacuation bucket of activity, we had a hard time trying to figure out with FHWA how a notification process would work. It took us quite a long time of sort of back and forth and putting our heads together. And we got that figured out. So that will be going through that notification process is nothing applicants need to do, but rather Caltrans will be doing that when amending FSTIPs. And the last bit that we had a challenge on was applicants. I heard continually over and over, we're having a hard time with the cost benefit analysis. What tools should we use? The CalBC tool, isn't capturing, what our project is, or our project isn't like a traditional transportation project. So how can we really, quantify the benefits? They're very valid issues that we had. And so I'm hoping that today we can sort of talk about that, what you all did for cycle 1, other tools that folks may use or know about, or if we even want to have a cost benefit analysis. And then the last was housing, land use, and transportation. This was put into the guidelines in order to sort of align, even though we're not beholden to CAPDI. And even though people struggled with this, I thought it was really interesting that you actually did a pretty good job, actually. So if you go to the successes, it's one of our successes. While it was challenging for folks, people did do a really good job. Next slide, Alika, please. So the program successes from cycle 1, we were able to have 100% match contribution for certain applicants. So yay, having that state dollars was really great and really helped maximize the amount of projects that we were able to bring forth. The evaluation criteria, the climate vulnerable nexus, again, was sort of showing that federal disadvantaged community versus what the state of California indicates as disadvantaged. Everyone did a really fantastic job in showing how their project would benefit climate vulnerable populations. And the land use, housing, transportation element, again, was a struggle for folks, but actually I think everyone did a really good job in at least starting to think about how will this project influence, our land use and housing. And engagement, we had office hours last year. We held 12 sessions. I would have loved to see more. I'm going to highly encourage everyone that if you are thinking of applying, please take advantage of the office hours for LTCAP. A few of the applications we got weren't eligible at all, usually because there wasn't a transportation nexus, or at least the lines were not connected very clearly. So come to those office hours. We want to help you. And so we want to have you succeed. And also something that caught my eye in one of the applications that we had funded last year was it was a collaborative application. And it was fantastic. They had folks from the university, they had folks from other agencies provide information, write different sections, and it was a very, very strong application. While that's not necessarily something new to grant writers, I do want to at least point that out, that collaborate with your regional local partners, your CBOs, whoever you can to help strengthen your application and demonstrate, that your agency is doing the work of community engagement. Are any questions before we move on to talk about cycle 2?
Yeah, we've gotten a few questions in. So we have one from Vic asking, can we see the summary portion one more time, please, once success is covered? So I'll go back a few slides. And then in the meantime, while Vic is looking at that, we got another question from Hannah asking, what percentage did you say were disadvantaged communities?
So Protect funding says that at least 40% of Protect dollars need to benefit disadvantaged communities. But SB 198 indicates 100% needs to help disadvantaged, or the term that state legislation uses is climate vulnerable. For our intents and purposes in this program, we are sort of interchangeably using disadvantaged and climate vulnerable because we're using two different sets of legislation that work in together, but clearly didn't talk together to sort of nail down the nomenclature. So in cycle one, we were able to, have 100% climate vulnerable nexus. Every project had a climate vulnerable community that they were able to clearly articulate and show how the project will benefit that population. For the second cycle, we are still beholden to SB 198, even though we don't have the state dollars. And so once again, I think that using the same system we created in cycle one was sort of like the indicating whether you have a federally defined climate vulnerable community or a state defined climate vulnerable community. We're still going to use that system because I think I'm not an expert, but last cycle I did a quick and dirty comparison of the federal climate and environmental justice tool and CalEnviroScreen. And in GIS, I sort of overlaid them. And there are some areas that the federal government does not consider to be climate vulnerable. Areas of the Central Valley, areas of LA, the Bay. And so, but the federal tool has a lot more rural agencies. So like Modoc County, almost like all of Modoc County was considered disadvantaged. And those just weren't aligning. If they had aligned 100%, we'd probably just pick one tool and run with it, but they don't align. And in not aligning, we're going to be leaving behind a lot of folks. So I think that using this system, cycle two, is the right choice because we were able to make it easy for applicants to, well, it doesn't fit in this box, but it fits in this box. So we'll run with this. And that flexibility is something that was really, really, well, it was really good to be able to provide everybody. I hope that answered your question, Hannah.
She actually followed up with another question asking, was the SB1 Transportation Equity Supplement applied to this program?
The SB1 transportation, or sorry, say that again. The
SB1 Transportation Equity Supplement.
Was it applied? No, it wasn't applied. But in the appendices from the guidelines in cycle one, there were like a lot of guidelines or plans or tools that to help applicants sort of do the work that the program asks for, especially in terms of community engagement. So no, we didn't integrate the equity, what was it, SB1 equity supplement. It was just provided as an appendix as a tool, but it wasn't integrated. Are there any other questions about that?
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay, let's, if we advance a few more slides. So for cycle two, these are sort of like the largest changes. So the left-hand side, the section, sort of where you can find these things in the cycle one guidelines. For funding sources in cycle one, you see that we had Protect and SB1. For cycle two, we'll only have Protect. And the 80 million is approximate, is not precise. I'm still working on getting the actual precise dollar amount for cycle two. It's roughly 80 million though. For the programming years in cycle one, we were able to program for 3 years. Cycle two will only have 2. And then the matching requirement, again, for cycle one, it was 20% or 0% for rural, underserved, or tribal applicants that indicated they wanted to use state dollars for their match. And in cycle two, we will not have that. We will only have a 20% or 10% match requirement. And that 10% is only if that project is included in the script PPL. Any questions before we move on?
I'll give it a few more seconds to see if anything trickles in.
Okay, well, we can move on to
Yep,
the
Not
next
seeing
slide.
any. Okay,
Perfect.
yeah, not seeing any hands raised. Oh, we did get one question that just came in. Would this grant fund park project which has tunnel improvements under the freeway, bike lanes, and/or curves?
That's a good question. My knee-jerk reaction is probably no. But as long as there's a nexus to existing transportation, and it really needs to be, well, actually, no. So it depends on what these improvements might be, but it really needs to be improvements to the transportation system, not improvements to something adjacent to the transportation system, if that makes sense. So if, let's say, a park is flooded, and when the park floods, the bike lane floods, the protect dollars wouldn't be used for the park, but it could be used to, I don't know, build a barrier around the bike lane, for example.
We got another question in asking, I did not see authorizing resolutions in the LTCAP guidelines of 2023. Were there any projects that were delayed due to authorizing resolutions? Are authorizing resolutions required in the application?
Authorizing resolutions are, well, you do have to have a letter, like a signed I'm trying to remember, do you have to have a signed board resolution? I believe you do. But Glory, do you remember? I'm really not unclear of what the board
Yeah.
or of the.
I'm not sure what that person is asking. Maybe they should come off mute, Alika.
Okay, Angie, I'll go ahead and unmute you. You should be able to speak now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Okay, so I'm looking for just a special districts, and before we can apply for any grants, I have to see if there's an authorizing resolution that's required. So reading the guidelines from before, I didn't see your application requiring that. So I'm just wondering, do I need to prepare anything beforehand, or did anyone else have that issue as they were getting funding?
We didn't require that.
If you look at what section is this? 1 second. Page 27, section 8, attachments. In the cover, there is a cover letter where the project will be implemented by an agency or other agencies. They have to be signed. But there's no resolution necessarily that is required.
Okay, perfect. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Teresa, did you want to add anything? I unmuted you, Teresa.
Mute. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We are assuming that the executive director of the agency that is applying for the funds has the authority to apply for the funds through their board. Although we don't require a board resolution, we are assuming that the board is the governing board is supporting that agency nominating that project. So
I would say, instead of assuming, we're trusting you. That we trust you to know that what you're doing is on the up and up. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times the executive director does have the authority to do that. And but that's what we hope occurs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Teresa. And then we also got a comment from Louis Zhao from OCTA stating authorizing resolutions are agency dependent. We also got another question from Patricia Chen asking, is there any chance there will be a third cycle?
Well, right now, no. There is unless EJA in some form becomes or Protect becomes reauthorized in the next federal budget, probably not. But let's cross our fingers and hope. But no, Patricia, this very well may be the last cycle.
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay. Let's move on to the cycle 2 timeline to give everyone, I had already sort of talked about this when Spyro asked a question, but this is a very high level Gantt chart of the activities to get the programs up. So we'll have 3 workshops spanning 4 months. That doesn't make sense, but that's because we don't know if we're going to hold one in April, or maybe you might need more time and hold one at the beginning of May, and we're unsure, so we're giving ourselves a bit of a buffer. We will be presenting the draft guidelines to the commission in May. We will be holding office hours during May and June. June is when we will be presenting the guidelines for adoption by the commission. If they are adopted, we will kick off a call for nominations, and that will end the last day of August, which I believe, if I remember, is conveniently on a Friday. So not like last cycle where we had the deadline on a Monday, which was not fun for many of you. So it'll be Friday the 30th. Then we'll go through internally, doing all our evaluations, talking to applicants, debriefing successful and unsuccessful applicants, release staff recommendations in February, and right after that would be an adoption of the program in March of 2025. That is perfect because programming for projects will be occurring July 2025 and over, right? Because this is covering a 2025-26 fiscal year and a 2026-27 fiscal year. So it looks like a lot of time. On a geologic scale, it's not. Any questions about the development timeline or anything here on this screen? And if not, we can move on to our discussion.
Sure. I'm not seeing any hands raised or questions come in at this time.
Perfect. Okay, then let's get into the part where we all talk to each other and I'm not talking at you. So we have 3 sort of buckets of policy topics that we want to bring to you today. So the first one would be funding. So considering we have approximately 80 million in Protect, we would like to discuss with you a few things. Do you want to only restrict cycle 2 project nominations to the con phase only? Because we only have 80-ish million and only 10% of Protect dollars. Remember, we only have Protect this cycle. Only 10% of that can go to anything pre-con. It seems kind of silly to only have a maximum 7.58 million to put into pre-con. And so I think maybe the easiest way would just be having a con phase only for second cycle. And I want to hear your people's thoughts, please. I know you didn't come today to just hear my sick voice talk to you. While you're thinking about that, we last cycle 1, we also had a 5% set aside for tribal applicants. We didn't have any tribal applicants, and again, with such a short, or rather a small amount of funding, thinking about maybe removing that 5% set aside, but just probably giving a priority to tribal applicants. No, I guess you could. Oh.
So we do have a couple hands raised. I'll start with Chrissy. Go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, so I apologize that I am just stepping into this meeting. So I hope that I'm sort of getting the gist of the question here and not missing anything. But I'm at Caltrans, District 2, and the headquarters Office of Air Quality and Climate Change just gave us a heads up that we should be submitting our project ideas for Protect, and everything that we have so far that we could pursue would be for planning. We just don't have any climate adaptation and resilience PIDs off the shelf and ready to go. And for us to get through, the early construction phases to get to a point where we can even get to construction would require a planning phase and then pre-con. So I hope that is in alignment with the kinds of questions that or the kinds of feedback that you're wanting. But
actually,
just a
yeah,
heads up.
Chrissy, that is good. So unfortunately, with this program, we can't fund planning phase. That would be the Caltrans Office of Climate Change, which you mentioned. They have like a planning grant. Actually, Lucas, if Lucas is still here, he will probably know more than me if that is even still around. So Lucas, yes. Do you know are those still around, the planning?
Yeah, Chrissy. Well, I think maybe we should just give a disclaimer in general if any other Caltrans folks are on the call. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, but for LTCAP, the state DOT, Caltrans cannot be a primary or lead applicant for these funds, correct?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Okay, so I just missed that information because I'm coming in late, so.
That's okay. Chrissy, by all means, I think in cycle 1, there were a few proposals where it was a regional or local lead, and they had support or even a partnership with their, Caltrans district of whatever that geography, like that they were within, you know what I mean? So there's an opportunity there for our districts to partner with local and regional agencies, but the local and regional agencies would actually have to be the lead applicant. And again, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong on any of those points.
And just a quick
No,
follow
you're
up
right.
on that.
You're right.
Those local partners, those were for construction projects that were ready for construction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Lucas,
And
yeah, okay.
And Chrissy, yeah, I mean, as far as other planning opportunities, I guess to speak to the group broadly first, for non-Caltrans folks as well, we understand, at least from where I sit, that there's still a lot of planning needs when it comes to climate resilience or adaptation projects. There are other opportunities out there to fund planning needs. First one that comes to mind is the climate adaptation planning grants that my office manages. I don't manage those directly. Some of you may have applied for those for their second cycle, which just closed, unfortunately. But one other remaining opportunity that's more competitive is that national FHWA administered Protect discretionary grants as well. So they are allocating 1.4 billion over the life of EJA, over the life of Protect. They're coming into their second cycle this year. Again, we don't know exactly when, but we expect it as early as this spring. And there are 4 subcategories for those grant opportunities. And one of them is dedicated for planning. It's the planning grant category of the overall Protect umbrella. The good news with those grants is that they are, at least for cycle 1, were 100% covered by FHWA. There was no match requirement for folks that were successful. Again, the bad news on those ones is that it's 49 other states that are competing for those funds as well. So it's a bit more competitive than, say, the LTCAP, which is formula funds that California has already received and the CTC is allocating. So just throwing some other ideas out there for meeting planning needs. And then, yeah, Chrissy, with Caltrans, we have the adaptation planning study funds as well that we'll be talking about later this month and that's for pre-PID only for like feasibility studies.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. I appreciate that.
Okay, we've gotten a couple comments come in through the chat, so I'll go ahead and read those. We have one from Victoria Cacciatore stating, we should maintain eligibility for planning projects. Resiliency projects are continuously evolving. We have another comment from Candace Vanderhyde stating, having a 50 million project cap seems excessive when there are just $80 million dollars to go around. We have another comment from David Ruperta stating, given the lower amount of funds available this cycle, it would be good to maybe reduce the cap on awards from 50 million to 25 million to replicate. It'll be the same as the SB1 LPP competitive program. We also have another one from John Elise stating, I would prefer not to have the stipulation of con only. Our project was awarded PA&ED and PSNE and is still looking to pursue right away. And then David Ruperta followed up, maybe just remove the eligibility of the PA&ED phase for LTCAP, similar to the SB1 TSEP program. And it looks like Lucas has provided a couple helpful links in the chat. And we have another hand raised. Nafili, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Nafili Barrett with the Mendocino Council of Governments. So I just wanted to make a comment on the idea of having con-only funding. So similar to one of the comments in chat, we had a local agency that had originally applied for 2 different projects in the last round and for the full projects. And I believe based on, and I'm sure Rebecca will remember this, based on discussions with staff, they modified their application to just cover PA&ED and PSNE, with the understanding then that they would come back and apply for right-of-way and construction in the second round of LTCAP funding. But this proposed change would prevent them, obviously it would prevent them from applying for the right-of-way, but because they don't have, it's a small rural county without the ability to fund right-of-way, it eliminates the possibility of them applying for the construction phase also. So that's my comment. It's concerning, and I think it's I don't know. There are so few funding opportunities for this type of project, for implementing this type of project, that it just seems like.
I totally hear you. What if we only funded, and this is again, I'm just throwing this out here. What if we only funded right-of-way con as opposed to PSNE and PAED? Considering that Protect would only fund 10% of the 10%, or only 10% of our available funds can be used for a right-of-way.
Yeah, I think that, that definitely would be better, because then it would still at least allow people that are in a similar situation to Mendocino County to apply.
Okay, I appreciate that, Nafili, because I actually forgot about Mendocino. Yeah, they only did go for the 2 phases.
Yes.
And Jannalise, you're right too. Yes.
Rebecca, David Ruperta had suggested just removing eligibility of PA&ED. So that would be another kind of a compromise.
Well, I would say on top of what David said, the PAED and PSNE. So we would only then be funding construction and right of way to get those projects up and out as much as we could.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that answers Candace's question as well. She asked, so right away through construction.
I'm thinking probably yes, because based on the discussion we're having right now and the fact that we just don't have that much money. And I really love to personally, I really love to be able to have it, like, spread the love as much as possible. I don't like winner take all for a lot of it. So that is also, that kind of bleeds into the next bullet point of, reduce, remove 50 million cap. People are like, that's too much. We had a 50 million cap in cycle 1 because we had 296.5 million. And again, it was to sort of give everybody something, right? So if we do a right of way in con, I think that that would be great because it does make sure it gets those folks we funded in cycle 1 over to the finish line. For the 50 million cap, I saw in the chat, I think it was David, 25 million. Yeah, similar to LPP, or there would just be no cap because 25 million for construction is not a lot.
Okay, so Victoria, I know you have your hand raised. Before I jump to you, we got another question asking, and this is from Matt Deal asking, is there a stipulation for project readiness for a construction project? We have a project that would be eligible, but we are in the early stages of design and environmental. The pre-construction work is funded, but we will be needed construction funding as we get closer to the completion of pre-construction activities.
So as long as your project is considered what, to use the Caltrans terms, like ready to list. If you're ready, if you're shovel ready by 25, 26 or 26, 27, and you're only looking for con funds for those 2 years, then you would be eligible for LTCAP. Taking into consideration that you meet other eligibilities as well, but yes, that would be fine.
Great. Nafili added in the chat that she wants to thank you for considering agencies that still need right-of-way. Louis Sao added, how would design build projects fall in the right-of-way con limitation?
That's a really good question, Louis. We didn't have any design build last cycle, and as a result, I'm not very familiar with it personally. I do know that ATP has design build. So Lori, I don't know if you could answer that for Louis.
No, I can't, because
Okay.
no one ever uses it in ATP. I don't know if Teresa knows.
Okay, so on a design build project, we would do the allocation under the construction allocation. So we have to kind of remember that we are limited because it's all federal funding now. We're limited to only 10% of pre-con. And so that's something that we have to be aware of, regardless of how we land. But for design build, everything goes in the construction phase. The other comment I want to make is cycle 2 is, we're hoping is going to be how would I put it? I don't know how to put it, but we're trying to get more funding for the program because, everybody's seeing how great the program is and how needed the program is, especially, as we're seeing weather events that are occurring that I'm sure we're all seeing the devastations that just occurred. So I do think that there's going to be more discussions in getting more funding. So I'm hoping that cycle 2 is the next cycle that is going to be small. Moving forward, I'm hoping that the program will continue. I don't think I've ever seen a program that goes away with a new act. So but I'm the optimist. So I'm thinking this is a program to stay. But with that said, I do think there is value in us funding pre-construction activities so that we can get projects ready to go for future cycles. And because there is no other fund source. So there is no other programs really that could really fund these type of projects. I guess you can go on the STIP, but that's limited as well. But anyways, I'm glad we're having this conversation because it kind of gives us all something to think about. And we're hoping that we can all partner and kind of advocate for a continuous funding on this program because it's very unique.
Thanks, Teresa. I'm gonna have to sit down and think about the design build more because I'm not familiar with it. So that's something I'm taking notes and I can circle back at the next stakeholder workshop.
Okay, we have a couple other hands raised. Victoria, go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe I should just second what Teresa said based on the importance of these projects, and that it is great to help the projects that got their foot in through the first cycle, but we still have a lot more people that are coming to recognize the importance of adaptation projects, and they need to start somewhere. But I appreciate all the perspectives heard and the great work that CTC staff has been putting toward this project program. It sounds like there's been a lot of behind the scenes problem solving. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Next, we have Louis Zhao. Louis, go ahead.
I was waiting for the unmute button. Louis Zhao, OCTA. So I wanted to explore the design build thing a little bit, and also comment on the right-of-way construction limitation. I think the majority of what we've been seeing for our resiliency projects has been design build, because the conditions keep changing, whether it be an emergency project or not. Anytime we go out there and we do some work, we find something else happening and we're having to redesign projects over and over again. So that's one comment. The other comment too is, and this is maybe something, Rebecca, you can look into, is whether or not that would get around that 10% design limitation. Because we're programming it as construction, it's being seen as a construction project. I'm hoping that sort of helps. We have projects we're looking at that will likely be design build, because every single time a rainstorm happens, we have to go out there and do something. And we're looking at applying for an implementation phase, specifically to deal with certain hotspots. So that's one. On the second thing, I don't necessarily want to limit the program to just right-of-way and construction. I agree that there are a lot of us that are still trying to deal with the environmental process. And
but with the 10%, because that 10% limitation is imposed by the legislation. So would $8 million be enough for a PAED for most folks here? Like, would you
I mean,
want?
there may be small projects and there may be big projects, so it's just gonna depend. I can't say, but there may be projects out there that could just be 2 million for environmental, that could just be 2 million for environmental design. I don't want to put that limitation if there's an agency out there that needs environmental support. With that said, I don't think the commission's limited to awarding to that 7 million limit, right? You can, if you only get 2 million requests and you just fund 2 million, you move on. But I don't want to just say outright that we don't allow environmental. So maybe we don't do a set aside. Maybe we just allow it, but we don't do a set aside or something.
Oh, the set aside was for tribal applicants, because the last cycle that would have given like 15 million or so, and now it's almost insultingly low. So I'm like thinking if we should just remove the set aside, and that was for tribal applicants though.
So before you, okay. I want to understand two things you said. So you were saying that the design build may not be subject to the 10% of pre-con.
I'm asking if it is or not. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing that we'd have to look into.
Okay.
The other thing though is, like Rebecca keeps saying, that's 10% is not very much. It's only 80 million. So I don't know, it might be hard in project selection. And if we get all of these projects that need the pre-con phases and we only have 8 million for it. I don't know.
I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to scoring, right? So the commission would score the projects, and if you don't get enough good environmental projects or projects that score high enough that are environmental phase only, then you just wouldn't fund those. I just don't want to close that door.
What if we do?
Then you and Rebecca have a very hard job.
Yeah, so I don't know, just just want to make sure everybody's hearing what Rebecca's saying, that it's only 10% of, so 80 million is not a lot to begin with. And then, 10% of that that's not very much.
What I'm trying to avoid here is a situation where we have, let's say, 10 great projects and you all need PAED and PSNE funds. And let's say you're all reasonable. You only need 2 million. Well, that's only 4 projects that we can fund.
Yeah, that's the
and
problem.
You all are out. And that's not good either, right? So we're trying to find a balance with in my mind, what my goal is to finish the projects that we had started, right? Especially with like what Nafili brought up, we funded 2 for PAED, PSNE. There was a couple others that only had, PAED through right away. And so with such a strict restriction, with such a restriction on the PAED, PSNE right of way funding that Protect is allowing, I just don't want to run into a situation where nobody gets funded because everyone's project was dead in the water without PAED, PSNE, and there's not enough money to fund all of those phases.
Rebecca, we've gotten a couple other comments in the chat. So David Ruperta noted that normally design build is allocated as construction allocation. Patricia Chen noted that she agrees and let's think positive and fund all the phases. Hannah asked a question. Can you repeat the reasoning before the 5% removal of the set aside?
Hannah, do you mean, can you repeat the reasoning before the 5% removal? Can you?
Or the reason behind?
Oh, the reason behind it. Because the first cycle, we had 296 million. We had a 5% set aside for tribal applicants that at least we would carve out dedicated funding, at least for any tribal applicants. They could always get more money, but the 5% was at least set aside for those applicants. And we didn't get any last cycle. And so I'm thinking, well, I still need to talk to some of the stakeholders I talked to in cycle 1 that are tribal stakeholders, but thinking instead of a 5% set aside, we would instead either just prioritize tribal projects as opposed to having a dedicated amount of funding because we have such a little amount to play with.
So Rebecca, I just want to add for Hannah that these are discussion items. So we're discussing it. It's not like you have made this decision already to remove it. So you're discussing with stakeholders.
Yes. Yeah. None of these are mandates, folks. Like this is just stuff that as I've been going through, I'm looking at the old guidelines, I'm making edits, like what works this cycle, what isn't working this cycle. And everything, all of the discussion items that you'll see, we're only on the first one. We still have 2 others. These are all for us to, discuss, argue over, in a great collaborative way. Like this, none of this is me telling you this is what we're doing. This is, I see an issue, let's talk about it and let's get into an agreement. Or at least try to.
We got a couple other comments in the chat stating, one from Candace Vanderhyde stating, keep in mind that 10% at 8 million is assuming one project is awarded for the whole program. Patricia Chen noted, keep in mind there are projects that don't need right away, but they could be helped greatly by a small amount of money for PAED and or PSNE. And Candace asked her to provide an example, and Patricia noted projects on existing facilities or right-of-ways do not require right-of-way. And so that was the clarification that Candace was looking for. And then let's see. Lewis added, maybe keep a minimum 5% tribal set aside, but don't make it the ceiling. Um, and then we got another one that just came in from Lucas stating, can you confirm or remind me that the tribal set-aside offered in cycle 1 is for federally recognized tribes only? And Rebecca, you went ahead and addressed that. Yes, it's for federally recognized tribes. And then it looks like Carl Anderson from MTC has his hand raised. Carl, go ahead.
Thanks, Alika. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Lori and Teresa. I'm thinking on the fly here and thinking ahead. I would hate to see the program restrict pre-construction phases now in the guidelines, and then we get to a point in the future where we do find more funding for these types of projects. I think it would be more difficult to go back on that provision, but maybe a good solution for this cycle is in the guidelines to say that you'll be prioritizing construction phase only projects or construction and right of way, since the amount of funds are limited to the since the amount of funds that are limited that would go to the pre-construction phases. So I just wanted to make that comment.
That's an avenue we could pursue, Carl. That's not bad, right? We could still leave that open and flexible, but Lori, go on. I see you.
Yeah, so that might be a better way to go, because then we would have a way to deal with if we get a lot of projects that need pre-con, we could kind of prioritize them a little bit through the project evaluation process. So that's probably a good idea.
And it also provides a lot of, depending on what the application pool looks like, it may provide a lot of fodder for advocacy in future years for more funding as more and more jurisdictions begin to consider these style of projects.
I think that's a really good idea.
Maybe people can react to that a little bit, see if you can get some comments on that idea.
Yeah, so what Carl's saying is, we would leave it open. Anyone can apply for any phase, but we would be prioritizing construction applications. So for folks that are thinking that maybe they do want to apply for the earlier phases, how do you feel about not being prioritized? We would be prioritizing con.
We have Louis Zhao with his hand raised. Louis, go ahead.
Louis, as at OCTA, I feel like I'm talking a lot now. So the question I would have for that is, how would you prioritize projects that have multi-phases? So they're asking for right-of-way and construction, or design and construction. So would those just get treated as construction?
Those would be treated as not construction.
Okay.
They would have, I'm sorry, I'm thinking, yeah, they would have to be treated as not a priority, because they would be asking for funding that we're severely restricted on providing.
Louis, can you say that again? I didn't totally
I was going to respond real quickly to Lori, but I'll wait for Louis to. Okay, go ahead, Louis.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's, if you have a multi-phase project, and you have a pre-construction phase tied to it, how would that be prioritized? Would it be not priority or a priority?
Right. So the reality is, if your project is ready to go, that is the priority. If your project is ready to start construction and you've done all your other phases, that's really what how we prioritize it. Where you've done all PAED, PS&E, you just have right away and construction, that will be prioritized over another project that hasn't even started the environmental phase. And we realize that there's a lot of really, really good projects, but the reality is the funding is not there. So we're just, and I agree that we keep it open and we just prioritize it internally. It will be a lot more work for us, but just like our other programs, projects that are ready to go, that ready to start construction, we have always prioritized those projects in all our programs. Does that help?
Yeah, I always ask random questions like this. I always challenge you.
Of course.
We got one other comment in the chat from Patricia Chen stating, I agree with leaving it open, but with priority for construction, and it's a good balanced solution.
Okay, that's perfect. I think we'll bring this decision back to the next stakeholder meeting after everyone's had some time to sit on it and think about it. But yeah, that was great, Carl. Thank you for that. I feel like you sort of put a nail in the coffin, but like in a good way. So yeah, I also agree. So for con phase only, what we've talked about is, well, I'll look into design build. I don't know what FHWA has to say about that. Because although this is like a state program, it's federal dollars. So yeah, I'll have to look at that. For 5% set aside, maybe not removing it at all, but and again, it wouldn't be a ceiling. Like just like last cycle, you know, if we had tribal applicants, it wasn't going to be a ceiling. It was going to be a dedicated bit of funding that, you know, would be carved out specifically for tribal applicants. So maybe we'll keep that 5% set aside and potentially remove or reduce the 50 million cap. I saw reducing it to 25 million. And I think I saw removing it entirely. I don't remember now. So what about a 25 million cap? What David had suggested. Is that enough for everyone's projects? Should we have a cap at all this cycle? While you guys are thinking about that. Matching sources, I asked Casey to think about this for a minute, allowing STIP as a matching source. I haven't gotten an answer just yet, but that was something a few applicants had brought forward last cycle, and so I wanted to make sure we talked about it the second cycle. And a lot of people brought up, oh, well, this is a federal program. Why are the match requirements proportional? Federal programs allow tapered or non-proportional match expenditure. And so I wanted to talk to you guys about that. Teresa, I'm really glad you're here. See if you have anything to say about tapered match. I don't think any other commission programs have that. I'm not sure. But if you all here have any experience with that non-proportional matching, it would be good to hear from you. Would that make things easier, harder for your agencies?
Rebecca, we do have one question that came in from Louis Sao asking, what was the average request last cycle?
Oh, I do not know. I did not. I'll have to look at that, Louis, and get back to you. That would be easy to calculate, but I can't do that right now. We had requests all over the map, really. Well, we can move along to the application. Not everything has to be answered today. We'll what the second workshop is for. So if you go ahead, Alika, advance to the next slide. We've got another policy topic. This one's short. For last cycle, we had everyone email me their application package, which wasn't awful. A few applicants had a hard time. They had to kind of break it apart into different pieces because they had a lot of pictures or whatever. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't great. And so ATP has procured a contract to use Submittable for their 7th cycle applications. And I'm very excited. Beverly of the ATP team, she did a lot of work getting this contract, so very excited so we can use it for LTCAP as well. That should make things a lot easier for folks. So we'll have everything saved on a cloud rather than emailing one person your package. And there's another change that we will be requiring is that with your fact sheets, when you submit them, they must be remediated. We had a heck of a time last cycle doing it within a day. I think Lori did it all. She like PDF'd everything very, very quickly. It was a headache, and we don't want to avoid that this cycle. And so I know that submittable, we had put like a 35-page word count. Submittable doesn't necessarily have a page count. They have like a word count per evaluation criteria. So unless anyone has like horror stories about submittable, please tell me so we can try to work around that. But otherwise, I think the application itself will be mostly unchanged, aside from requiring a remediated fact sheet from you all. There's nothing here we can move along to the evaluation criteria.
We have one unrelated question, asking, will a recording of this webinar be available after?
Yes, it will be. We'll put it up on the LTCAP webpage. We are recording, right? Yes, we are recording.
Yes,
so yeah,
we
it
are
will be up
recording.
there. Okay, and then go on to the next slide, Alika, for evaluation criteria. So again, I talked about it earlier, you know, Protect requires 40% of federal dollars to benefit disadvantaged communities. SB 198 requires the program to benefit, like 100% benefit climate vulnerable communities. So what I had said in the beginning of the session, last cycle, how we sort of worked around this was getting applicants to use the one of the two federal tools to identify whether or not their project would benefit a disadvantaged community. And the guidelines had, you know, there was like 3 different factors of how that could benefit. It would either need to be connected to a broader project, directly connect to a disadvantaged community. There was one other, I can't remember what it is now, but so this cycle, even though we don't have the state dollars, we're going to keep that system. We're going to have folks look and make sure that their project would benefit a federal identified disadvantaged community and a state. I wanted to ask everyone here, for those of you who had applied, or maybe who had started the process and then gave up because it was too hard. I don't know. How did that work for you? Was that easy last cycle to do the federal and the state tools? I don't hear anything, so maybe it was really easy then. So we're going to keep that. So these are discussion items. So for evaluation criteria, because of that 10% match reduction, should we be prioritizing script projects? I'm of the opinion that yes, we probably should be prioritizing script projects. You folks maybe should think about working with, you know, Caltrans, getting your project submitted through the link that Lucas had provided in the chat box. Does anyone see any downside in prioritizing script projects? And I will say, like, for Nafili, if Nafili's still here, if like the prior applicant hadn't been on the script, they certainly can get on it for the work that they, or for the application they were awarded and for the application they will be submitting. So that would help get that 10% reduction for the next phase. Somebody last cycle had, I think it was Carl, I think, maybe wasn't Carl, so sorry to call you out. Somebody had asked you, do you want to prioritize urgent work? And I don't really know what that means. Does that mean work that's been neglected for a long time and now it's very urgent? Or does that mean sort of like an emergency situation? Does anyone here know what the consideration for urgent work means? Okay, it wasn't you, Carl. Sorry for calling you out. Somebody did. And so I thought that was an interesting perspective. Do we want to prioritize projects that address some sort of urgent need? Or no, do we think all of our projects address an urgent need? And so prioritization based upon that is silly.
We do have one hand raised, Rebecca. Lewis, go ahead.
Okay, just really quickly, on the prioritization of script projects, I think it's probably going to be important for you to add, I hate adding stuff to applications, but adding a section that tells you where it is in the script so that it's not difficult for you to identify it. We may have projects, all of us may have projects that are listed in the script, but we may be delivering portions of it or something, or requesting funding for portions of it. So that's something I definitely want to make sure that projects aren't eliminated or not prioritized because it could be perceived that's not in the script. On the urgent work, I think it's going to be very difficult to establish what that means. And I think it's going to be very difficult for you at the commission to evaluate that. So I think everyone here is going to argue that they have urgent work. So I don't know how it's going to work. And it may be something you want to bring back for discussion or whatever, because I can argue that I have urgent work and it needs to happen. And I can identify that with a study or whatever, but I'm sure everything that you're going to get is going to be considered urgent work. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion about this program. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Lewis. I appreciate that. I saw David.
Yep. Yeah, so David included in the chat, if the script project list is going to be fiscally unconstrained and Caltrans will accept any projects, that seems like a checking the box exercise to prioritize those projects. However, if Caltrans is going to limit what projects they put in the script, perhaps their new CSIS process, that could be a barrier that could unfairly disadvantage some applicants.
Is Lucas still on?
Yes, he is. Lucas, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still here. Those are good points, David. Let me think about how to respond to this. We are not applying CSIS to projects that we're adding to the script list from externals. The bar we're setting as you begin interacting with that intake form, as you'll see, is really just protect program eligibility at the federal level, and also making sure that it's aligned with SB 198, which really means, in a oversimplified nutshell, alignment with the California Climate Adaptation Strategy that the California Natural Resources Agency owns. And then beyond that, for LTCAP nominations specifically, just acknowledging that you're meeting like the base screening criteria, which we had borrowed from the Cycle 1 LTCAP guidelines, which there's overlap between all of those things. But you'll see as you navigate through the questions on that intake form. As far as a box checking exercise, I guess I agree with that. I guess what I would say is that as long as you meet those eligibility criteria, there's no reason not to ask to be added to the script list, because really the long-term benefit is that if you're subsequently awarded a grant or grant funds from either this program or the FHWA program, you would be saving on that cost share, right? You would be saving that 10%. So that's really kind of the long-term goal for being included in the script. And since it's unconstrained, it's really like a wish list, a statewide wish list for Caltrans projects and for external projects as well, showing, hey, these are our most urgent, our most critical adaptation needs. These are what we're submitting applications for across these programs to get funding for. And then again, if they're subsequently awarded, you can save some money, and it makes it that much easier to deliver those projects. And I guess I'll just add to, like, from the federal perspective, if you look at, not that I expect anyone to, the statutory requirements for the Resilience Improvement Plan, really the incentive there from the federal point of view was to get states to conduct basically vulnerability and risk assessments for their systems. And in California, as Rebecca kind of alluded to earlier in the conversation, we were ahead of the curve. With Caltrans, we've had statewide district level vulnerability assessments and adaptation priority reports, at least for the state highway system, completed in 2019 and 2020. And then we have other climate data tools that help us identify climate threats and potential solutions to address those through, say, like CalAdapt and some of the tools that are referenced in the LTCAP Cycle 1 guidelines. And so really the story that we're telling FHWA, which is true, is that we're using that sort of analytical background, that work that's already been done through tools like I just mentioned, to identify those threats and prioritize what are the most urgent, needs to address them. So that's kind of like the setup and the punchline as far as the narrative of the script, and then the project list is showing FHWA, all those things considered, here are our most immediate needs. And that justifies the cost savings, so to say.
Thanks, Lucas. I'm really glad you stuck around this whole time. So to recap what we heard so far, we would probably want to prioritize script projects. Actually, we will want to prioritize script projects. If you all do that work to coordinate with Caltrans and get it in there, it only seems natural to prioritize them, especially based off of the match reduction. We won't be prioritizing urgent work because really, what is that? It does seem like an extra barrier for folks, so we won't be doing that. Cost benefit analysis. I know some folks had struggled. Are there any other tools besides CalBC that is as accessible to folks who maybe aren't very used to cost benefit analysis? I just wanted to ask, does anyone have any tools in their back pocket that you use instead, or that you know of that can maybe be used in lieu of the CalBC tool? And if not, that's fine. We'll talk about it again next cycle to see if there's another way that folks could quantify their cost benefit. Yeah, I know that there are tools out there, but there's almost too many tools out there. Do you know, Matt, if there's one or maybe two tools that maybe would fit better for the program? And again, oh yeah, go ahead, Alika.
Sorry, I was going to say, while Matt is, oh, never mind. I thought Candace wanted to speak. Oh, she does. Okay, so Matt, while you add something in the chat, Candace, go ahead.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for hosting this. Last year, I just didn't have an opportunity to really dive into this one that much. And now that I am, as you're talking about the cost benefit analysis, I'm wondering, can you like it to another program for me? I haven't really gone into the weeds here on this program yet. Is it like HSIP in the BCR sort of way, or is it more like another program that you can like it to? The reason I ask is because some of the thoughts that we have on what we would propose is actually wouldn't be things you would see in a typical HSIP BCR. They'd be in quantifiable, but qualifiable. There's quality and quantity there that could be outside of like crash rate and benefit to reducing those crashes. So can you help me better understand the BCR, the cost benefit analysis for this program?
I'm totally unfamiliar with the HSIP BCR, but we needed to have some sort of cost benefit. And so it was sort of like a check the box exercise in truth for cycle 1. And a lot of applicants had said, like, this isn't meaningful. Our project, is raising a bridge. We're just raising a bridge so we don't get flooded. And the cost benefit tool is asking for reduction in GHG and emissions, blah, blah, blah. It's going to show that there isn't a cost benefit for my project. Am I going to be unfairly scored? And we told people, no, it's difficult. We're doing our best. We're all doing our best. And in this cycle, I really want to know if there's a more effective tool or suite of tools. I did see, here's Matt with the US DOT cost benefit and the TIRCP tool. But I was hoping maybe for something, and I haven't looked at that one, Matt, so maybe that's exactly what I need. But I was hoping maybe if anyone knew of a tool that could quantify resilience, like climate resilience projects.
Yeah, the USDOT tool is it's essentially a crash-based volume and the benefit of savings, as far as I understand it. Unless Matt has a different opinion about the use of that. But I don't know of any, like you're saying, because the projects we're considering, we can tell you certain things that be impacted, like, that we'd, let's say, improve emergency response time by at least, a certain percentage. But it's not going to be crash data related necessarily.
And this is not a safety program.
Right. So there's
right. So
it's like, where do you find how do you validate those cost benefit stats, right? How do you standardize them is what you're asking, right?
Yeah. Or if there's at least something that is more applicable to this program than the CalBC tool. And if there aren't any, we'll probably just keep that again, and it'll be a check the box sort of exercise. We really do want to keep in alignment with all of the other commission programs, even though I think of LTCAP as being sort of a rogue program within the CTC. We do want some alignment and consistency across programs. So that's why we have been grappling with this cost benefit discussion. Do we just keep it in there and we just keep doing our best, or is there something that is more beneficial and more meaningful to really get to the benefit of the project over how much it's going to cost?
I think that's a noble endeavor.
Maybe not a smart one, but we'll try. Okay, well, I'll take a look at some other tools. If you all here know of any, please let us know.
Hey, Rebecca, this is Lucas again.
Hey.
I'm not sure if the FHWA tool is the same as the USDOT that Matt linked. FHWA has one as well, along with a guide. It's not resilience specific. As far as the question of if there are any resilience specific ones, the only one I'm aware of, having worked in this space for a little over a year now, is Colorado DOT has produced one, and I'm trying to find out if it's available to the public or not. And I'm also not sure if it being specific to a different state would really serve much purpose here or not. So those are open-ended questions. I think in the long run, trying to quantify some of the nuances for resilience specific projects and for a BCA analysis is, something that we would love to accomplish as a state DOT as well, because our districts are looking for a similar tool. But there's nothing out there yet that's at least California specific or at the FHW at the federal level either.
Okay, well that's really good to know, Lucas. Thank you. Matt, I saw your chat. Doesn't CARB have a team that can build modeling tools? If there are going to be future cycles of this program, then I think it would be beneficial to have a tool that is effective at assessing the goals. I completely agree with you. The downside is this is probably going to be the last cycle, potentially, unless we hear something different. Lori?
So I was just going to say, because I saw Matt's comment that for at least the first and maybe the second cycle of the ATP, we use the CalBC tool, and it doesn't work for active transportation well either, which is why we are building our own cost benefit tool for the ATP, but it's taking years. So it takes a long time to build a new tool.
I My mind is blown, Lori. I can't believe it's taking that long. I mean, I can believe it, but that's unfortunate. Yeah, it takes a long time. Okay,
Rebecca,
so, oh, go ahead.
sorry, we have one final hand that's raised. Lewis, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, I have to run, but I do want to make one comment on this. This was incredibly difficult to respond to. And I don't remember if it's a scored criteria, but I think the problem you're going to have with this is that it has to be context sensitive to what you're building. The approach we took was if you lost the facility, what would happen? What would increase in GHG? So we used the CARB tool to determine the loss of ridership and how much GHG increase you would have. So we basically flipped the tool. We also ran a CalBC for our project, and we did the exact same thing. It's very difficult to do this, but I think it's going to vary from project to project and what you're trying to preserve. For example, if you're trying to work on an evacuation route, that's a whole different story of how you're going to have to tell that BC. So I don't know if there's one tool that's going to be able to accomplish this, and I don't know if there's a way for you to do this at a level playing field, because the projects are all so very different, and they're all trying to achieve very different things. So I would say that it probably has to stay as a checkbox exercise if it stays in. And I don't have good guidance on how to address it. But I think this is an area where agencies will have to get very creative. Applicants have to be very creative in how they explain this in their applications. I'm more than happy to talk to you more about the commission about this and how we approached it. It was definitely more of a backwards way of doing this.
That's super clever, though. Yeah, I would definitely want to get together, Lewis. I would like to just hear how you did that and maybe offer that as a way, like kind of a step-by-step, like this is how you might approach it for your project. I do agree, though, that maybe it's sounding like it will just continue to be a check the box for now. But if we could supplement with maybe better practices that Okta had used, I think that would be really helpful. At least get us in the direction we want to go, right? Like, we're still stuck with this, but look at the advancements we're making in some way. So
yeah,
very good to know. I love that. I'll email you later to try to.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Awesome. And the last discussion item of the day is evacuation strategies for people with mobility needs. So we had quite a few evacuation projects. We had 5 last cycle, which were all really great projects. And somebody had brought up, well, what about evaluating those evacuation projects on, like, you're building or enhancing the existing system to get people out, but what happens when people don't have access to a car? Are there any plans in place at the local or regional level to evacuate those folks? And if anyone from the last cycle who had an evacuation project is here, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but obviously this is also open to everyone. Do you know, like, if you were to apply for an evacuation project, do you know if there are evacuation strategies in your local area, regional area? Could you easily answer this? Could you collaborate with emergency evacuation or first responder agencies?
We do have one comment that came in. This one is from Candace, stating perhaps there's just a narrative section that justifies the cost benefit for that specific project. Rate the scoring like ATP does on whether it is clear and convincing. And she agreed that it would be cool to get Lewis's tutorial. And then we got another comment stating Green Lining would be really interested in discussing this further ideas, case studies, and I believe that's supposed to say tragedies here. Strategies. Thank you.
Yeah.
Strategies. My brain stopped for a second.
So to answer Candace, I actually really like that narrative section, maybe in a supplement to that, sort of do the CalBC, but then have people maybe tell their story a little bit more effectively. Lori, what do you think?
Yeah, that's what we ended up having to resort to in the ATP because of this exact issue, and we don't have a BC tool yet. So Yeah, that might be one way to go for now. We could look at what Lewis was talking about, maybe do a narrative, and then, if everybody's being very hopeful that this program continues, then could consider building a tool specifically for this program too.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of the things that we discussed this time we'll be bringing back to the next stakeholder meeting. So if there were crickets on some of these discussion items, you'll be seeing them again. Well, if you go to the next slide, Alika, we're about to wrap up. I do want to have like a small bit of time if anyone has any other items they would like to discuss or something that we didn't cover here. Alika, can you advance to the next slide?
Sure. Before I do, we have one hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Right. Go ahead, Yesenia.
Hi, this is Yesenia Prez with Green Mining.
Hi.
One item that I think was discussed last year and I think fits well into just this conversation on evacuation strategies for people with mobility needs, as well as some of the projects where the connection for land use and housing.
Mm-hmm.
I know this was discussed last time as having an additional section in the guidelines about the projects that were submitted from this past cycle 1 for cycle 2 applicants, just so that they can see what cycle 1 projects look like and how they incorporated some of those ideas into the projects.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you mean like uploading the fact sheet from the project or something more detailed?
Yeah, I hadn't thought through this entirely, but I think an idea and just for ideas around how these strategies were incorporated into cycle 1 projects would be interesting. I don't know the amount of detail. I think that what I've seen online about the projects chosen right now don't actually offer a lot of details on just how some of these connections that were made. And so I think just adding a little bit further details on like things like how evacuation strategies were thought about in specific projects or the connections made between the land use and housing.
That's a good.
I know I went back and like listened to the webinars from last year, and it is something that had been brought up before. So I just wanted to flag that again.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, we didn't require a narrative about the evacuation strategies for folks with mobility needs, but I think that this cycle would be beneficial because now that we've got our feet under us, folks are more or less familiar with the application. Hopefully, they've built those good connections with other agency partners and CBOs. This should hopefully not be a very heavy lift, but will hopefully be more illuminating as to why the project is so incredibly important, and that we're not just leaving folks behind, literally, right? Okay, go to the next slide, Alika. And this will be an open. I wanted to give everyone an opportunity in case something didn't get brought up you wanted to bring up, maybe something that you would like to discuss for the next stakeholder meeting. It's not a forever hold your peace either. You can always bring it to the next stakeholder meeting as well. Pretty sure you guys are burnt out. We've been here almost 2 hours. So if there is nothing to add from anybody.
I'm not seeing anything come in through the chat or through hands raised.
Okay. So if you advance the slide one more time, Alika, it'll just highlight the next steps. So we'll be incorporating the feedback heard today. We'll be working on and answering some of the questions you all brought up, and then we will schedule the next stakeholder meeting. There will be at least 2 more, probably March and April. We'll probably give May a rest, but as I said in the beginning, we might have to bleed into May, just depending. So you will see a TBD, like a workshop announcement and everything through the various channels that you get all of your LTCAP communication or CTC communication from. Lori, did you have anything?
I was just going to say, Rebecca, both you and Alika, you did an excellent job. I know that you both are not feeling well, so really you did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to thank Lucas too for being on, because he is very helpful, and we really enjoy partnering with him on this program and the script.
Yes, I agree, Lori. Thank you, Lucas, for being here the whole time, answering all the script questions. If you're not familiar with Lucas, he is an absolutely lovely individual. If you need to bother somebody, I would say bother him, but he's pretty busy. So yeah, thank you all for attending. I'm really appreciative of your feedback, of your presence. We have taken all the notes. We will be addressing all of your questions. If you advance the slide once more, Alika, and you'll have our contact information. If you have any questions, suggestions, opinions, I want to hear them. So email me or Lori. If you don't want to talk to me, that's also okay. And then if you have any information that you need, the program webpage has basically everything you need about the program. And so if there aren't any other questions or departing words, I hope you all have a lovely Wednesday.
Not seeing anything else, but thank yous come in through the chat.
Perfect. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for